Thank you so much for having me here today. It really is an honor to be here. I remember coming to the Heritage Foundation 5 years ago for my first NeW national conference, and that was back when it was just a few of us around a conference table downstairs in a tiny room. And to see what Karen has been able to do in the past 5 years and to work with her over the past 5 years, it really has been quite incredible. She's grown NeW, along with your help, to multiple campuses across the country, which means that more female students are feeling like they have a place at home on their college campuses that are serving as a safe place. As we know, college campuses are often a very hostile environment for conservative women. So it's really great to see how much, how amazing it is for hard work and how hard work can really pay off in a pretty short period of time. I definitely didn't think that I would be standing here talking to you. I was just asked out in the hall, what do you want to do in 5 years? I don't know. I'm taking this whole thing day by day, week by week, and just working really hard to get there along the way. And last night I had the pleasure of sitting down with some of the student leaders who were here today to talk to them about what NeW means to them. And it was really great to hear that they feel like, when they speak out or they start a new chapter, or when new female students come to their chapter, they feel empowered and they feel like they have, more of a voice. So it's great to see and hear about those real life stories that are happening every semester on our college campuses, and not only just every semester, but year after year. So I want to start today by addressing how utterly absurd it is that the left is portrayed as the champions of women. In my book that's coming out on July 8th, it's called Assault and Flattery, The Truth About the Left and Their War on Women. It's all about this idea that the left has this monopoly on being champions of women's rights. And every book that turns into a published piece of work comes from an idea or a moment. And I had a few of those moments in the lead up to writing my next book. The first moment came in February of 2012 when Nancy Pelosi invited a 30-year-old Georgetown law student, Sandra Fluke, to testify on Capitol Hill about why taxpayers should foot the bill for birth control. And at the time, she was portrayed in the media as a young woman in her early 20s. But that wasn't true. She had been well into her adult years for more than a decade before making her statements on Capitol Hill. Now, my office is in Roslyn, which is down the blue line a little bit across from Georgetown. And when I look out the window, I can see Georgetown University. And after listening to her testimony, I looked across in disbelief and thought, how is it at my age, at the age of 23, as a young professional working to pull a paycheck and to pay taxes, that this woman, who was 7 years older than I am, wants me, a taxpayer, to pay for anything other than my own medical needs and prescriptions, after she dared to complain about public interest scholarships not being enough from taxpayers to fund Georgetown law educations. I really was in disbelief. Why is that my job to pay for what she wants to put into her body, to pay for someone else's stuff? And it was again clear to me, after graduating college and understanding how the feminist movement works on college campuses, that the left likes to uphold people who pass responsibility of their actions on to others. And so I wasn't surprised when she was upheld as a new feminist hero. So then a few months later, this is when the biggest moment came for this idea. I was sitting at the 2012 DNC convention in Charlotte, North Carolina for hours and days, listening to speech after speech about how Mitt Romney had a war on women, how conservatives hate women, how they want to put them back in the kitchen. Like that's a bad thing. And not only did Bill Clinton speak one of the nights after Sandra Fluke spoke, but the DNC honored a man that Ann Coulter describes as having the only confirmed kill in the war on women. The TV cameras didn't catch this, but because I was there, I did. In between speakers, the DNC played a 5-minute glorious tribute video to none other than Ted Kennedy. And if that was not bad enough, they plastered the words "Women's Rights Champion" right across the screen. It was actually really amazing. And for some reason, during this beautiful portrayal of his life, they skipped over one of the most iconic moments of his life. The time when he drove drunk off a bridge, wandered away, and left a 28-year-old loyal campaign staffer, Mary Jo, to die in his car. And nobody dared to utter the words Chappaquiddick that night. But I had plans to talk about it on television, because that night I knew that I was booked on a political panel for Piers Morgan's show. And I'm glad that I have this archived, because clearly he doesn't have a show anymore. And I was on with Piers, and my friend Richard Grinnell, who's a conservative, he's more of a foreign policy guy. Hillary Rosen, who is the woman who infamously said that Ann Romney has never worked a day in her life. And Van Jones, who is a self-avowed communist. So before sitting down, I'm sitting there, and it was in the CNN cafe, which they set up, you know, it's kind of different than just a regular TV studio. And I was so hoping that Piers would bring up Ted Kennedy, because again, it was something that wasn't broadcast on the networks because the video was played during the commercial breaks. And thankfully, my moment came 5 minutes into that segment. In the video that they played during the convention, they showed Mitt Romney debating Ted Kennedy when he ran against him for a Senate seat back in the 90s. And in the video shows Mitt Romney saying that he was pro-choice. And although he's since changed his position, that didn't stop Piers from turning to me to say, Katie, did it make you uncomfortable to hear Mitt Romney talking about the joys of being pro-choice? And I just said, no, you know, Piers, you know what made me uncomfortable? Is that at a DNC convention claiming to be fighting the war on women, that they would play a 5-minute tribute video to a man who left a woman to drown in his car. And so the panel erupts. Hillary Rosen immediately freaks out, says, you know, oh, come on, you know, so I don't go further to talk about what exactly happened in that situation. Piers Morgan said that my comment was below the belt on air. And then during the commercial break, Hillary Rosen turned to me and said, I think what you said was disgusting. To which I said, I think what he did was disgusting. And I think that I got more hate mail from that, you know, because I mentioned it than Ted Kennedy probably got back in the day when he actually did that. But Ted Kennedy isn't the only false hero of the left. And people might say, well, Ted Kennedy was so long ago, why are you bringing it up? I'm bringing it up because he's still glorified as this hero of the left. So if you don't want me to bring it up, maybe you should stop glorifying him as one of your heroes at your conventions and at your women's movement organizations and all of that. But again, Ted Kennedy is not the only hero of the left. Hillary Clinton is too. On college campuses, as you all know, she's portrayed as the ultimate female figure who provides a glowing example for women everywhere. Yes, all women. That's Hillary Clinton's thing. But the fact is that she doesn't. And her underreported legacy is one of defending rapists and sexual predators. And I'm not just talking about her husband. Earlier this week, audio of Hillary Clinton gleefully defending a child rapist was published in the Washington Free Beacon. To give you a little bit of background, in 1975, during her time as an attorney, Clinton took on the case of Thomas Alfred Taylor, a man who brutally raped a 12-year-old girl at the age of 41. Clinton said that she thought Taylor was guilty. Now, the issue isn't her defense of an accused rapist. This is America, and everyone, even the worst of the worst in our society and the most evil, are entitled to an attorney. Instead, though, the issue is Clinton's behavior after getting Taylor out of a lengthy sentence for his crime when she thought he was guilty, because he served less than 1 year in prison. The Washington Free Beacon reported this, quote, describing the events almost a decade after they had occurred, Clinton struck a casual and complacent attitude toward her client in the trial for rape of a minor. This is what Clinton said in the audio. I had him take a polygraph, which he passed, which forever destroyed my faith in polygraphs, she added, laughing. And she can also be heard laughing at several points when discussing the crime lab's accidental destruction of DNA evidence that tied Taylor to the crime. So apparently, accidental destruction of DNA evidence wasn't enough for Hillary Clinton to just go on that and say my client cannot be given a lengthy sentence because the DNA evidence has been destroyed and that's the way our legal system works. That wasn't enough for her. She instead had to go further and attack the 12-year-old victim, who was a female, as possibly emotionally unstable and someone who may be exaggerating or romanticizing a sexual experience, because rape is so romantic. Further, Clinton wrote in an affidavit at the time, quote, "I have been informed that the complainant is emotionally unstable with a tendency to seek out older men and engage in fantasy." So she went out of her way to attack a 12-year-old child in the case. Sure seems like a champion for young women, right? Just today, the Daily Beast followed up with an interview of that rape victim, who has remained anonymous for obvious reasons, who described what Hillary did to her as, "Hillary Clinton took me through hell. She took the case of mine in '75. She lied on me. She said, quote, I realize the truth now, the heart of what she's done to me. And she's supposed to be for women? You call that being for women, what you've done for me? I hear you on the tape laughing." Can you imagine if a conservative man or woman was ever caught on tape laughing about getting a child rapist who raped a child at 41 off? I don't think that the standard would be applied the same. So this newly uncovered audio is just one piece of Hillary Clinton's long legacy, career, and life of defending sexual predators. Clinton's history of brushing sexual assault and abuse of young women under the rug for her own personal and political gain is something that she's been doing for decades. Let's fast forward a few years after a giddy Clinton relieved a child rapist of any real consequence or justice, and you'll find decades where she willingly helped destroy the women who her husband, former President Bill Clinton, was accused of sexually assaulting or raping. Time and time again, instead of holding her husband accountable, she defamed his female accusers as mentally unstable loons looking for money. Clinton repeatedly allowed women to be lied about, smeared, and manipulated so that her philandering husband could hold on to power, which eventually led to her own power as a senator from New York, a presidential candidate, and President Obama's Secretary of State. And by the way, the entire point of the women's movement and equality for women was so that women didn't have to put up with husbands like that. But Hillary Clinton turned it into a joke. But speaking of her record at the State Department, what exactly did Hillary Clinton do during her tenure there? Did she really stand up for young women and girls all over the world? No, instead she ignored alleged rampant sexual abuse of minor girls by high-ranking State Department employees. Under her watch, U.S. Ambassador to Belgium, Howard Gutmann, was accused of routinely ditching his protective security detail in order to solicit favors from prostitutes and minor children in a nearby park, according to an internal memo written by a chief investigator for the Office of the Inspector General. A State Department security official stationed in Beirut was accused of engaging in multiple sexual assaults. Further, a U.S. Embassy official was removed for allegedly trading visas for sexual favors. And as CBS reported last year, at least 7 of Clinton's security agents routinely hired prostitutes on official trips overseas, and their behavior was described as endemic. And although they were eventually reassigned, they weren't seriously punished for taking advantage of those women overseas. And when investigations were launched into misconduct, they were immediately shut down by Hillary Clinton's chief of staff. And the female whistleblowers who spoke out against and exposed this abuse were retaliated against for doing so. Whistleblower Carrie Howard was run out of the State Department and run out of the Foreign Service, stripped of her job, and bullied after exposing U.S. Consul General Donald Moore allegedly engaged in sexual activities with women inside his government office and with call girls in Naples, Italy. So this is just a short, very short, this is all in my book, by the way, if you want some more. This is just a very short snapshot of Hillary Clinton's legacy of defending, again, sexual predators and rapists. She's done it for decades, and yet somehow has been portrayed as a women's rights champion, but her record proves the opposite. Hillary Clinton is America's most famous enabler of abusive and powerful men. But please, by all means, let's accuse conservatives of waging a war on women. But debate about Hillary Clinton and other false liberal heroes like Ted Kennedy and the historical record is all but banned from college campuses. And that's why it's your job to break through that censorship. And in order to fight effectively on campus, it's very important to understand exactly what you're up against. The left is dependent on ignorance to accomplish their goals and to push their agenda. The left has been playing a long-term game with women since the 1960s and has been lying about female empowerment and equality ever since. So how do you exactly understand the left if you're not a liberal? Well, last year I applied to go for press credentials to go to and cover the annual National Organization for Women Conference in Chicago. Because after all, NeW bills itself as the largest organization of feminist activists in the United States, and according to its website, since its founding in 1966, NeW's goal has been to take action to bring about equality for all women, unless, of course, you are a woman who happens to be a conservative or a capitalist. So prior to applying for my press credentials for the convention, I came across a NeW newsletter which proclaimed as its goal for the future to expand and diversify membership in our ongoing efforts to bring different perspectives to our organization. So I was certain that they would be so happy and welcoming to me to come to their convention, because clearly I would be offering diversity of thoughts and a different perspective to the issues they would be talking about. But instead, just 2 days before my departure for Chicago, I was informed that despite being a credentialed member of the media and of the press, my press credentials for this conference were being denied. Thank you for your interest in attending this year's NeW conference as a member of the press, someone named Sarah Coppersmith told me. However, press credentials for the conference will not be issued to you. We regret any inconvenience this may have caused. No other explanation, not, we don't think you're qualified, whatever, nothing. So I wrote back and said, as a credentialed female member of the press, I'd like to know why the credential to the conference was denied, especially considering flights and hotel rooms have already been booked. I look forward to your response. Thank you. She never responded, but I didn't care because I was going to go anyway. I just was like, whatever, booked, the plane is going, I'm going to get on it, and I'm going to go. So the only way now, I'm looking for alternatives to get into this conference. And the only way to gain admission was to do something that I thought I would never do. I became a member of the National Organization for Women. And I still am. I still have my card. Paid my dues in January. So when my plane touched down at O'Hare Airport, I wasn't sure exactly what to expect. I knew that Chicago was ground zero for radical movements, and the post-1960s feminist movement was definitely going to be no exception, because Chicago, after all, was the home of Saul Alinsky, of course, famous Rules for Radicals, Bill Ayers of the Weather Underground, Jeremiah Wright, and, of course, Barack Obama. So when I walked in on the conference at the Hilton in downtown Chicago, I expected to see a room filled with young women fighting for their rights and equality and empowerment. But instead, I went into a room that was nearly empty. There are more women in this room than there were at that conference. So I was looking around, listened to a couple speeches, but it really wasn't the speeches that caught my interest at the convention, but instead the exhibit hall and what was being sold, because they were selling books about Marxism and the feminist movement. So here's this first one, Education for Socialists, Women's Liberation and the Line of March of the Working Class. Communist Continuity and the Fight for Women's Liberation. Documents of the Socialist Workers' Party. Here's one. Let's see, here's another one. I actually paid for these, by the way. I have even more of my money now. Women's Liberation and Marx's Philosophy of Revolution. That's weird. Marxism and Freedom, which makes no sense. I mean, those two words in a title together, I mean, come on, right? Okay, a little confused. And then, of course, the most important one of all, Karl Marx, Communist Manifesto. This is what they're selling at the National Organization for Women Conference, not at just one booth, but at multiple booths. And I was a little bit surprised by that. So I took some of it home. So after, getting my reading material, I quickly realized that NeW wasn't about women's rights, but about socialism and big government and abolishing capitalism. And when any conservative organization like CPAC even has exhibitors that the mainstream media deems radical, this leads to a number of headlines and news stories designed to embarrass the entire conservative movement. By contrast, when the nation's largest women's rights group features exhibitors that preach Marxist ideologies and condemn American capitalism, there is no comment about it anywhere. Good thing I went. It's the only one there. But the fact is that Marxist teaching is not just a tiny fringe part of the modern feminist agenda. It's actually its centerpiece. From the time of Karl Marx through the 1960s and up until today, the progressive women's rights movement has hardly been about women's rights at all, but instead about a transformation of America and its society and the transfer of wealth through government force. Women's rights have simply acted as a veil to distract away from the true intentions of progressive activists. The socialist revolution in America depended on two things: a breakdown of the family and women voting for progressives. In their 1974 manifesto, Prairie Fire, The Politics of Revolutionary Anti-Imperialism, domestic terrorist Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn and the Weather Underground dedicated an entire chapter to how the women's rights movement should be used to advance revolutionary goals, calling feminists to join their ranks and political agenda, writing, quote, "Sexism will not be destroyed until imperialism is overthrown. It is in the collective interest of women to do this and to take full part in building a socialist revolution. We need power. Socialist revolution lays the foundation for the liberation of women and begins dismantling the tenacious institutions of sexism." This was their blueprint. This is what they wanted. This is what the plans that they had for women and their movement as they moved forward through the decades. They're very patient. As the introduction of the manifesto states, it was written to communist-minded people, but more importantly, it was written to women's groups and laid the groundwork for a long-term takeover of the feminist movement. This analysis represents the beginning of a process, not its final conclusion, the manifesto states. And in that same manifesto, Bill Ayers gave women a set of tasks based on his realization of the power of an uprising women's movement that could be hijacked and brought into a progressive cause. Quote, "Our goal is the development of feminism, which genuinely determines, safeguards, and defends the collective interests of women, and which points in the direction of revolution. We need to build a revolutionary feminism. Women are at the intersection of a crisis and a will to fight for survival." So Ayers and his underground believed that men acted as male supremacists to women, and that in order to change society, a breakdown of the traditional family structure was necessary. And in order to destroy that structure, they portrayed women as victims inside the family. Sound a little bit familiar to what you hear today from your women's studies professors? They wrote, quote, "The individual capitalist family structure is a wasteful social form, not healthy for children to grow up in, and a trap for women. It is a sanctioned form for sexual exploitation and a hypocritical double standard. The family breeds competitiveness among us, allows no future for women with grown children, and demeans old women, separating them from the life of the community. The ability of single mothers to work and raise and care for children and maintain a household is a monument to women's strength and determination." Because being a single mom is a really easy way to go through life. On the condition of women, they wrote, "The modern male-run nuclear family, when we tear away the veil of sentimentality in the basic unit of capitalist society, capitalism and the modern family structure matured together historically, feeding off of each other's development." So you have to remember, he's thinking economically here. He sees capitalism as being a result of a family-structured unit, which is true. If you think about the way that big government works, when people don't have a family to depend on, what do? They asked for help from big government, which empowers socialist policies. But despite what the Weather Underground and their ilk want women to think about a so-called wasteful structure of the free market economy, The embrace of the traditional family structure is one of the best things to ever happen to women, and it keeps them out of poverty. It should be no surprise that according to a report from the United Nations Development Project, women living in anti-free market or socialist systems, especially in Eastern Europe and Africa, experience higher rates of poverty and lives of misery and despair. Socialism makes everyone poor. It doesn't make anyone rich, and it doesn't make anyone happier. So again, going back to the centerpiece of this movement, what Bill Ayers said and laid out in this blueprint isn't on the fringe of far-left policy positions. Its philosophies are deeply embedded in Marxist and socialist thought and are prevalent throughout Marxist and socialist literature, the same literature for sale at nearly every booth at the National Organization for Women Conference. So with that background, let's go straight to the source. What did Karl Marx say about women? It can all be found in his Communist Manifesto, which is why they hand it out and pay for it, get it, where he boldly states his goals of destroying the family and promoting single women in addition to dependence on an all-powerful state. Abolition of the family, he wrote, claiming men exploit their wives for their own personal gain. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family based? On capital, on private gain. In its completely developed form, this family exists only among each other and the capitalist state. But this state finds things that complement each other in the practical absence of the family among the proletarians and public prostitutions. Which doesn't really make a lot of sense anyway, but. So Marx actually believed that keeping women and children protected inside the family was exploitation, rather than exploiting single women for votes and for government funding. He believed that they should instead belong to and be raised by and educated by the state, not people who actually care and love them. He said, quote, "Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To do this, we have to plead guilty and change the system. But you will say we destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replace home education with a social structure." And again, what Marx failed to point out and what his goals would ultimately result in is that it would leave more women and children in poverty than ever before. And we've seen that since the 1960s with single motherhood skyrocketing and the poverty of children and children in single parent homes skyrocketing as well. So in closing, now that you have all that, it's your job to take that and send it to your friends who don't know much about it and the history. I know that I, as a young female, am sick and tired of being defined by pills I take, by body parts, and as a victim of my gender. And I'm also tired of the yes, all women groupthink, and that the monopoly thinks that they have that the left thinks that they have some kind of monopoly on female thought. We're all individuals, we all see things differently, and instead of attacking us, maybe they should live up to their own standards of diversity and tolerance and hear what we have to say. I'm sure that you're sick of that kind of thing too. Women succeed through opportunity and free markets and hard work, not through dependence on the government or through socialist policies. Again, I want to stress, the left depends on ignorance for their agenda to succeed, and the place to push back against this classification starts on college campuses and in your new chapters, where the most militant ideologues exist, not in your new chapters, but on campus, to move an extreme agenda forward. Keep fighting, keep working with NeW, bring women who maybe aren't active in the process into your chapters, have them read my book, and I'll take your questions.